Hey guys, my name is Daniel. Today I'm going to be going over the exercise tracker project for freeCodeCamp's backend course. Um, Basically, we're going to be creating an exercise tracker that looks similar to this, where you can create a username, then you get an ID back, and then you could put your ID in, fill out the form for description of what exercise you did, the minutes it took, as well as the date you want to register that exercise for. And then we are able to enter these parameters and get a log of all the exercises from a certain date to a certain point and a certain limit back on the log. So we'll get started by opening up a Replit project here. And while that loads up, you'll want to open up MongoDB as well. That's going to be the database that we use for this. Up until this point in the projects, you should be familiar with how to use MongoDB. I won't be covering it here, but there are a lot of videos to help you get started. It's pretty simple. Basically, you need to create an account. It is free. I just gotta select the free options, and then should be pretty self-explanatory from there. Let's see if this is loaded up. It's still going. And everything's loading. Cool. And then the first thing we want to do once we get MongoDB Atlas set up, we'll want to connect to our application. So we want to click this link here and copy this right there. And then once our Replit project started or loaded up, we will want to run it, and then that will install all the packages in our package JSON file. So we'll download course.env automatically. And this is what the exercise tracker will look like. Now, one thing we do want as well is Mongoose. So we'll want to go to our shell and then put in npm install mongoose, and then that will help us create our models for our schema. And that's basically what the information that we send in will be structured as. And then that link we copied from here, to use it, we want to go to our secrets in the Replit. I believe Glitch does it this way as well, but basically it's just a way to keep our sensitive information private. So you'll want to use a key of Mongo URI, and then the value we put in is just that thing we copied. And right here where it says my first database, we'll want to erase that, and then give it a name of that makes sense to you. I'm going to put exercise tracker. And then for this password part, you want to erase that section of it and then press add new secret once you put your password in. The reason why this is a secret is we want to keep it private, so I'll just put that in for myself real quick. Press add new secret, and it should look similar to this. Now if I go back to server.js, want to create an empty space here, go back to my secrets, and then you could select between multiple different secrets, but I'm just using the Mongo URI here. Then we want to insert it into our code, and then we see it here. And that's kind of all we need to do with that. Now, we got Mongoose installed, so that's good. So we got everything we need here. And got Express, secret, we got .env. So now we want Mongoose. So const Mongoose require. Oops. I also got a new keyboard, so I'm going to be making a lot of spelling mistakes as I go. So bear with me on that one. Oh, we want to require Mongoose, and then we want to pull schema from Mongoose. And And then mongoose. Cool. And then first thing we want to do is create our schemas. So I'll just create all the schemas, and basically what they're going to look like are these here. So there are response structures. There are also the schemas. So we'll start with user, we'll do exercise, and then logs here, which we'll go over that right now. So for the schemas, the first one we'll want to do is our user schema. I highly recommend looking at the documentation if any of this doesn't make sense as to why it works that way. Looking at documentation will definitely help you in the long run and help you become a better programmer once you really understand everything and why it works the way it does. And then username, and that'll be a type of string. You can also add required, but we're not going to worry about that. You can also add ID, but if we don't put ID in here, MongoDB will just generate it for us. So we'll just work with it this way. And then we also want our exercise schema. That'll be a new schema. They'll have username, string. This will be date, duration, be a number, and then description of our exercise. And that's also a string. And our last schema here will be our log schema. So also have a username, it's a string, count, number, and then log, which will be an array type. Oops. Array. And then we want to connect those to our mongoose model. So the way that looks, user info will be mongoose model. You can capitalize this or you can keep it lowercase. Just do camel case for now. And this will be connected to our user schema. Just make this code a little cleaner. Middleware. Okay, so the next one will be exercise schema. It'll also be mongoose model. We'll get a little repetitive here. Part of the fun. Exercise info. Exercise schema. Const log info. Actually, I want to change that to info 2. Mongoose model log info schema. Cool. Then we want to do some configuration just to make sure we're connected properly to the database. Big. So the way we do that, Mongoose. So we'll connect with Mongoose here. Connect, and then we'll use the secret we inserted. You could also just do Mongo URI or process.env Mongo URI. That is what you'll normally see when it comes to env environmental variables. But just because we're using it on Replit, I'll stick to their way of doing it with the my secret. So we want to go back here, secret, and then just to avoid some errors that show up, we have to put this use URL rather. Use URL, use new URL parser. Again, just avoid getting errors. We also want to do use unified topology and set that to true. And then I don't actually need to. What was I doing here? Right. And then just to make sure that we're connected properly to the database, we want to return a log function. How do we do this again? And then we'll do console log connected to MongoDB. Well, then we just want to make sure that that's actually connected properly. So I'll restart the server. You can also restart this with Nodebon, but I didn't really bother doing it here. And connect it to MongoDB, MongoDB. So that's working well. Now, anytime we get JSON, we gotta parse it. So there's a couple things we gotta do for that in the middleware. First thing we want to do, so we want to parse it with Express. So there's two parts to this. We'll want to do URL encoded. Before I forget, Express URL encoded. And extended true. I forgot sorry, set this to false. I forgot the specificity of this, but basically if you put extended true when you parse your data, you just get a lot more data, and from my understanding is it just makes the app trickier to work with. So it's usually recommended to put false unless you kind of have to dive deep into the data. Not 100% sure on that, but that's what I heard. And then we also need to add another middleware. App use Express JSON, and that will help us there. And then now we can work on our API endpoints. Endpoint. methods. We'll do it like that. Cool. So first thing we want to do is make a post request with a username. And the reason why this works like this is if we go to views, we can open up our index.html. And what we'll notice here, so this is the form that we're looking at here. And basically it follows this route. So action tells us which route we want to follow for this component, and the method just lets us know which method we're using and whether it's a post, get. So because we are creating a username and we're posting it to the database, that's why it's post, is we want to put that information into the database, otherwise we want to get it. So that's why it works that way, in case you're wondering how this is connected. And then I'm going to go back to the server JS and start off with our first API. So as we mentioned, it's going to be a post request, and it's going to be to that endpoint that we were mentioning there, API users. Request response. And then the first thing we want to check for, it's not part of the test, but it's just a good measure to have, is to make sure that the password doesn't already exist. So the way we do that is we want to search into this model. This is the model that we're going to be looking into to check if there is an existing username. And we want to use the find method to find our parameter. So the parameter we're looking for, again, is username. So that will go here. And the way we know which username we want to look for is we want to see what is entered here, what is submitted. So the way we do that is we require the body and then the username. So the way this works is require basically means that we're requiring information from what we posted here, or rather that's the body. So require would be kind of what the database takes. Response would be something that we get back. The body is anything that is entered into these parameters. And then the reason why we look for username is because, as I mentioned here, we've got the post request, but then the name is username. So this is what it looks for here. And why this is the body of the form, and why username is entered in the require body. Where are we? Username this way. So anything we enter there, we'll search through that. What else do I need here? So once we have that, two comma, and then this is where we put another method. So we'll get error here and username data. Just put user data. So that's assuming there's something that works. Now we want to error check. So if we do have error, if username already exists, then we want to do console log error. And the way I usually do these error server So this will be for the server. Trying to remember. Okay. So console log, check if error, and else. If user data, so if what we get back is not existent, so if it tells us, yeah, there's no username, you're good. And so we check for that. And that means we can create our new user. So with Mongoose, we'll do const, and I'll just want to put test to make sure that it saves it properly. It doesn't really matter what you put in here, but I just want to make sure that all the information is saved properly. So const new user info. So we'll create a new instance of this model with a new ID here. So we're just saving this model. So basically this user info, we're working with this model. We're adding what's saved here. And again, with ID, we don't have to specify it if MongoDB is gonna add the ID for us. So we could just do it this way. And then, oops. Then it'll be require body ID. And that will know to just automatically create ID for us. And we'll also want username. And that's from the username body got earlier. And another thing we want to do is save the test. Test, save, and then we get error data parameters here. And if for any reason it doesn't save, that's something we want to check for. And console log, and then same thing, error saving data. Then error. What I'm gonna do, just a habit I have, is just adding that portion into our console log if we have errors, just to find it a little better. Where are we now? Saved. Now what we want to do is, if this saves properly, we want to get a JSON response, just the way they have it in freeCodeCamp. So we'll do respond with JSON, and then we'll respond with the information we got back that we saved. So make sure it's saved. Go data ID. And we'll make sure username is saved. So enter our data username. And then bottom. If we're here, yeah. Then if username does exist, we'll do res send username already exists. So let's test this out. Hopefully hopefully we don't run into issues. Okay, so Jason. That's your username, and then perfect. So we get our ID back and our username. Cool. Oops, run that again. So that's our first API endpoint. Now we'll want to do this post of our exercise information. So we'll do. Oh my lord, this keyboard. Holy guacamole. So this is our API endpoint 2. And it's going to be our post request again. Post. And the route we use for this is API users with the ID, a unique ID, and exercises. Okay. So where are we? API users, unique ID key, and exercises. Cool. And then there's a couple things we want to do. So we want to get the ID parameter that we insert. So the way we do that, do ID JSON, and ID require params. So if we were to put body here, that means anything that we get here. But because when we're posting this information, we have to put a unique ID. Think of this right? Yeah. We want to save that ID. So params ID for that. And we also, one of the tests, this actually got me when I first did this. Oh my god, there's too many to read through them. Basically, there's a test that checks that if we don't put in date here, it's because you can see like these 3 are required. Actually, this one's not required. But these 2 definitely are. I believe that ID is as well. If we don't put a date, we just want to use current date to bypass that. So we want to check for that. So we'll do checked date equals new date, and we'll require that from the body. We post it. New date. Okay. And then we also want to make sure our ID is correct. So ID JSON.ID. So the reason why I did this is when we do it like this, that returns us a JSON object. I just want to check the ID, just the number itself. Just because you can't post when you're trying to find a username or an ID, you can't use the JSON object. You gotta use the specific ID number, otherwise it confuses the system. So before we get into that, I want to check that the date, that we have a date handler. So no date handler. If checked And I was trying to figure out better ways of doing this. Actually, I was trying to think of a better way of doing this, but this is all I could find on good old Stack Overflow. So bear with me here. If check date is instance of date and is not a number, then checked date. I'm getting lost in the code. We want to return check date. So this just makes sure that there is a value of date and it's not blank. So return check date. Else, we want to create, we want to make sure that date or check date is the current date. So we do it like this. And I want to make a quick point here. You're most likely not going to pass all tests because of this little chunk here. And I'll get into more detail when we're actually trying to pass all the tests, but there is a bug right now with freeCodeCamp where you can't pass all the tests because the Replit servers run on a different UTC time than what freeCodeCamp kind of puts in. So there is an empty value that gets thrown in and throws one of the test errors out. I did manage to pass eventually just by waking up in the morning and then Hail Marying it and submitting the test just to see if this time it will pass that test, and sure enough it did. It seems like the only workaround for it is to try submitting the test in the morning. I am doing this at nighttime, so I pretty sure guarantee that I'm not going to pass that one test, but if you try at different times of the day, you should be able to pass it. It's unfortunate that it is this way, but they are working on it from my understanding, or I think there are ways around it where you don't have to do this at a certain time, but unfortunately I haven't come around to figuring out how to do that. But so we want to continue on here. So once we know that our date is checked, we want to look through user info and find by ID. And we want to check for ID with ID to check. So again, we're checking with the ID number, not just JSON of it. And as usual, request response. There we go. Okay. Now, while we're starting the search, we want to make sure that we run our no date handler. Checked date, and this will just let us know what we're working with as far as the date goes, whether we want to create a new one or if we want to use the one submitted in this form. So we'll run that, and then I get an error, so just a little bit of error handling. We'll console log error with ID, comma, and then error, else, or actually I'm getting ahead of myself. Oh no, we're fine. Okay, so same thing we did with the other one. I'll just do test for our data that we're saving. And I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll want to create a new exercise model. Exercise info. And then we'll want to fill in our schema information or model info. So we'll do data username, description, rec body description, duration, and we'll get all these three from the body. Body duration, and last but not least, we want to do the date. And because that one we kind of handled a little differently, we'll do checked date. And one of the tests requires us to make sure that we return it a certain way. So we'll do toDate string to return it as a string. Otherwise, it's not a pretty format. There we go. So that creates a new instance of that, and then we want to save that instance. Save error data when we save it. So the data is the data that we save here. And first thing we want to do is error handle. Error. Log error saving. That's what I forget. Just make sure that's clean. Error. Else we wanna save it. So yeah, we'll do console log saved exercise successfully. So that'll let us know that everything's saved properly. And we'll also do a JSON response back, just the way they do in freeCodeCamp, where we get an ID back. So ID to check, and username get from data, name, description, data, description, the duration, data, duration, and the date. And I kind of ran into issues with this one where I had to do toDate string twice. I don't really need this toDate string, but I figured it would kind of fix a test. Basically, this would essentially save the date that we post here in a nice format to our database. But for some reason, it didn't do that. But we live and we learn. But date string, and they'll return. This basically responds in a JSON format all this information to us to make sure that you have an idea of what things are going to look like in our database. Okay, clean this up. And we want to save this and run with it. I already forgot which username I'll put here, so just put duck. And then I want to grab this ID and post it in here, and then your exercise running for 20 minutes, and then we just won't post anything here. Let's see if our data, oh no. All right, so where's our mistake? Let's say here, unhandled error. This doesn't tell me too much. Error is not defined. Okay, so it's one of these. If error. Looks like everything should be good. That's my favorite part, staring at the screen. Trying to figure out why you know work. Shouldn't be any of these. User info. Run the function. If we have an error gets selected properly. Else const test new exercise. That checks out, and then error data. If error is error, console log the error. Yell error, error. That's really weird. As far as I'm concerned, this should be working. I wonder if it's 2021. So it's not that date. Huh. What are we at? Oh, 42 minutes. Ay. So much for a 10-minute video. Oh, that's probably it. Hey, that's we're gone AWOL. Something short. Minutes. Something recent. Wait, did I? Oh, that's weird. Turn check data. Check data is check data. Oh, no, that's not it. There we go. That's probably it. Let's restart that. Description running for 20 minutes. And we'll do this. What? How many more times can this happen? Think. If I was the bug, where would I be? Everything looks good here. Oh boy. Thought this would work. An ID, require params, check date, new date, require body date, data check, ID JSON ID. Small things. Let no date in there. If check date is instance of date, and let's have value. Turn check date. Else check date will equal current date. User info, find by ID. ID check. Oh, I know why. This should be error. My bad. And then it all made sense. Okay, take 27. Running 20 minutes. And we'll just submit like this. Hey, voila. We got our username, description of our exercise, date, and we get today's date, which is the 12th. That's wrong. It's the 11th. So this is why you get an error. In case you're wondering why you have to submit this in the morning, this is the exact reason why one of the tests fails. So your best bet is probably submitting this at midnight. Cool. So now we got that figured out. We want to do our third API point. Just comment this out. And then for this one, it'll be for our logs here. We want to make sure that all the information we submit, we get a log back of it. Okay, so for this, get, and then the route we'll use is API users, and then be our ID here. Logs. And request. Response. Oh my lord. Const. And then basically all the query parameters that we put in here, we want to save those. So do from to and limit. And the way we acquire those is require from our query. Then let ID JSON. Basically the way I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna, because MongoDB, the way we have set it up right now, to save everything the way we're doing it, it will create a new ID every time we create a post or any of these. So I'm gonna find the username by ID and then check that the username, check by the original ID and then check by username to get our information back, because the log that we get here, if I just try to find the logs of the username by we try to find the logs of the user by ID, because there's new IDs, I won't get the information. But if I just use the username, although it's the same username, there's all these different IDs. I can reference all those IDs logs of information with that one username. So I'm gonna do it that way. So we're gonna do it like this. Let ID to check, kind of like we did before. Get our ID JSON, and the ID specifically, just to make things look neat. We'll do this, and then so here we will check ID, like a security guard. User info. So we want to search our user info to find the ID that we're working with. So this is pretty much repetition of the last method. Error data here. And then basically what we're going to do with the queries, like the from, to, limit, we'll deconstruct it all in a variable. So we know that we're going to be looking for username. That's guaranteed because it's the ID and username. We're looking for that one person. So since we know we're going to do that, we'll create this for our query. And we know that'll have a username, which is our data username. And then this is not fun. We want to test that if we just have the from value, then we're just looking from into a certain date or until the limit of time. If we're putting a to query, then we want to search up to that, or if there's both, we want to adjust for that. So the way we will do that is if from is not defined, and I guess this would be if from is defined and to is undefined, and then we will query date, and these are this GT is greater than equals selector, query selector from MongoDB. Good to look into the documentation of that, or what kind of filters you could put on your search queries. But this will return anything new date from. It's from the date that we entered in the from parameter. It'll make sure that we return everything greater than that. And then we set it to query date, which would be similar to just going like this. Date, and then giving it the new date from. But we want to make sure that we only add it in there if it's actually present and it has a value. So query from. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Else if, and you can also do this with a switch statement. It definitely look a lot cleaner, but this is what you get today. So if to is defined and from is not defined, undefined. We'll do query date. And similar to before, we'll do $sign less than equals. New date 2. Make it 2. Else if. Oh man, it hurts doing so many else ifs. If this has a value and 2 has a value, then query date equal basically the parameters we said before. From and wait a minute, how am I doing this? There we go. Then LT new date. Okay, that was a pain in the butt. Okay, now we did do those. We also want to check for the limit. Do limit checker. Limit checker. Let's look at limit. And we'll set an automatic max limit. Basically, if no limit is entered, don't want to overload the data. So that's why we have max limit. And if we do get a limit in the search, then we'll return limit in the search. Else we'll return the max limit. Okay, now we do some error handling. Error ID. Exercise info. So we want to access this model and enter all the queries that we kind of just did the conditionals for. So we'll enter a query here, our final query. Now the documentation can confuse me. I don't know why we need a null value here. There's different ways to find the limit in the search query, but when I figured this is the only way that ended up working for me. But we want to run limit checker. Then we want to plus sign to turn limit into a number. Error data. And what we'll do first is we'll want to eventually have all the we'll want to add all the logged info because there's in the schema one of the logs are in an array, so we'll want to initialize the array or declare it first and then push all the information to that array that we need based off the query parameters. So if there's an error, console logs, so many console logs for errors. You can also respond directly in the what would you call it, screen, but I'm sticking to the console log. And then this would be an error with username or error with query or username, same thing. Error query error. Cool. And just for simplicity, set docs to documents. So it looks a bit clearer. You can definitely change that. Oops, this should actually be documents. Docs or documents, but makes my life easier this way. And logged arrays. Look at my old code while doing this, and definitely don't need to initialize logged array twice, but we're going with it. And then we'll have an item here. And then we'll want to map out everything that we get in the logged array. Return it. And then with the schema, the schema descriptions necessary. Will be item description. And then count. This will be logged array length. Then our log, which is the logged array. Or actually, I'm doing this all backwards. I'm getting ahead of myself. This will be item still. Date. To date string. This doesn't add up. To date string. This is also got to be item. This is duration. Okay, I know what I'm doing wrong. Yeah, I'm definitely getting ahead of myself. Duration. Okay, perfect. So basically, we got our query. We check the parameters of the query. We check the exercise. Look through it, but we'll check through the query, make sure if we got the information we need, and then if there is exercise info, we return it in this format, and I'll map it, and then we'll continue mapping as many as a result as we get, and the query parameters conditions apply to. And then where are we now? Then we want to save this. Oops. And then we'll do const, do test again to save the info. This will be a new log. And this is where we actually enter the previous values, username, the data, username. This is where we put the count. Count logged array length. Log be our logged array. Okay, that looks good. Then we want to save the info, so error data if there's an error, console log error saving exercise. Error. It does save properly. We'll just do a console log saved exercise successfully. And we want to send JSON back as part of the test requirements. And that will have our ID to check. So that's the ID we originally put in the parameter. Username, data username, the count, and the log. Which for this one we could just do logged array. So clean, love it. And let's see how many things we failed here. Okay, so far so good. And then I'll actually open this up in a new page. And what was my ID again? Did I save it? Oh no, of course not. Okay, so I'll have to create a new user. FAD. Grab this ID. I should really save this, but life's too short. Running. Man, come on, man. For 10 minutes, and then we'll just enter that. Cool. Now that we have some data to log, actually, what I'm going to do. Still have that. So we'll do 2021. That. And then if I go to API users, our unique ID, and then the logs should see that. Awesome. And then if we do a question mark from what's this? 2021, 12. I thought that the month would be 0 index, but I guess it's not. Quite funny. 2. I should just return 1. Or we could do limit. Actually, let's return that. Do it like this so I know both of these should return. I'll do add limit, because remember right now it's set to 100 if we don't set it ourselves. And then we'll just do 1. And then our count changes and the log changes. Cool. So that's going to pass most of the tests right there. We do have one more endpoint we got to do that gets all the data. And where are we at right now? Hour and a bit. Not too bad. Okay, so the last one, number 4. Do that. App get. So if we make a call to this route, API users, we want to be able to get all the log info. So the way we do that, we'll require res. We'll want user info find. So if we just do it this way, just an empty object here, that returns all values. So we find it that way, check for our errors, and then we'll get data back from it. And if we get error, this is what I meant when I said earlier, you could just res send the screen response. So if there's no users, then we put no users. And then else res JSON, and we'll respond with the JSON data. Okay, and then let's test that route. That's just API users. But this should return both of these. Oh, yeah, all our users. Okay, well, perfect. And yeah, that's that. And it's not midnight yet, so fortunately, I'm not gonna pass the one test as I mentioned. But let's give it a shot. Go here, play the challenges, gonna run through them quick. The way it looks here, we'll see all our exercises are saved successfully. And one of these will come up as an error. Oh, not the one I expected. Okay, but that's most of these. Just a small error with the logs, so I'll fix that right away. But yeah, this is the one I was referring to where, because right now it tells us December 11, but for Replit servers, in Europe, I believe. So for them, it would say December 12th. So this one is a conditional pass. So just check that you're getting that done throughout, or you're submitting the test at different hours of the day to make sure that it works for you. But for these ones, let's figure out what happens with our logs. I think I forgot to do to-date string probably. Maybe. So log AD limit. Let's see, maybe I can pinpoint down. So I'll guess an issue there. Sometimes it's a simple spelling mistake, but it looks like there should be date. It's probably our issue. So submit that. See if this passes, or you know what I mean. What the heck? Okay. Yeah, this is what's expected. So essentially this passes your quiz, but again, just to kind of prove this point further as to why this is failing, is if we put an ID here. Oops. What's an ID we can use? So if I copy this ID, put it here, running 20 minutes, and let's say I don't put a time, this is the test that fails. On here, I'll say December 12th, 2021. But if you check right there, oh, it's definitely not visible because my big faces are in front of it. Let's, excuse me while I adjust that. Yeah, right there. See that very small lettering, number 11. And that's kind of where the issue arises. So just make sure that you test out for that. For me, I did it first thing in the morning and passed, and then I was wondering what is going on because I tried later that day, and then I had to do some research to figure out why it worked, why it didn't. Lost a bit of sanity, but now we're here. Hopefully, you learned something. And if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. I'll be more than glad to help you through your code and help you out because I definitely had some issues myself and had to reach out to others. So by all means, I'd love to pay it forward. But until next time.